it's pretty much a done deal here in Dubai. You advertise a position, you're going to get a bazillion
Thousands.
applicants, right?
Straight away.
What actually makes up someone's market value beyond the numbers?
Why should somebody pay you to come into work?
Ooh, deep.
Send me an email highlighting what you delivered this month. Like, if I had to fight for your salary, what data could you give me to fight for it?
The trend is that everybody is going towards what are your expertise in something and how can you communicate that? So really honing in on what it is you actually do rather than saying I can do a little bit of everything and spreading yourself thin across loads of different skills.
If it's a conversation and it turns almost into a planning meeting, a strategy meeting, because they see you coming on board,
That's a
you're
good
like,
sign.
that's a very good sign. That's a healthy sign. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of For Those Made to Do. Today, we're super excited to dive into something that everybody has been asking us about, and a topic that I think most people are not quite sure where to start with, which is market value, your market value, where you stand in the market, how to determine it, how to talk about it, and how to negotiate fiercely for your real value in this job market. And we're going to look specifically at Dubai because this is a very fast-growing job market, but it comes with a lot of competition and a lot of adversity in some cases for entry-level talent. We've been looking at some stats, and we know now that 72% of the people that are currently in jobs will be looking to change jobs this year. So that's making this space a bit more competitive than the usual. And at the same time, looking at some salary data, it's looking like salaries are not growing on par. We're only looking at a 1.6% increase overall on average across sectors, across jobs, and across all levels. So in this market, it's extremely important that you understand how to determine and how to articulate your market value so that you make sure you beat the odds, whether you're negotiating your salary in your current role, in your current company, or whether you're actually looking for a completely new job this year. And to break this topic down, we're super excited to have someone really special, really exciting in our studio. I say this about every single guest, but I truly mean it. Today, we're so lucky to have in our studio Dr. Amanda Nimon-Peters with us. She's one of our current professors at Holt. Mandy and I are some of her students. We're doing our MBAs as well, so she has taught us a few leadership courses, and she has a lot of insights for us today. So we're really glad to be able to share all of these with you. So let me give you a bit more information on Dr. Amanda. Dr. Amanda is a behavioral scientist and a professor at Holt. She's teaching leadership. She started university at the very young age of 16. She maybe will tell us a bit about that. She holds a first honors degree in psychology from the University of Adelaide and a PhD in behavioral science from the University of Cambridge. She has extensive senior management experience in a very broad range of industries and geographies as a team leader at Procter Gamble, both in Europe and in the Middle East, a board director for a housing charity in the UK, a successful startup founder in Dubai. So she's done a bit of everything, and also a dean at a business school. And once upon a time, the science team leader examining human impact at a field camp on Kerrville Island in the Antarctic Peninsula. So lots of insights, lots of stories to be shared today. Welcome, Dr. Amanda. Thank you so much for being with us today. And we're so excited to hear your stories.
We really are. Welcome.
I'm really delighted to be here with you. I think that you're doing a fantastic job on this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I think you're doing a fantastic job in your roles in the careers area of Holt. And I find that often the insights and the advice that you share with people overlaps quite well with my focus on leadership, communication, and influence. So I think there's going to be a lot of synergy today.
Absolutely. We love that. And what we normally do is start off our conversations before we get into our deep dive questions is just start with a little icebreaker. So we've both had the opportunity to read your book, Working with Influence, 9 Principles of Persuasion to Accelerate Your Career, which we loved and we use on a daily basis sometimes.
Yes. I've seen it in your office up on the bookstand. It makes me happy.
Front and centre.
It's been there.
We're acting like a library at the moment. So students are asking if they can loan it out. I'm like, only if you bring it back. Thank you. And out of all the principles, which is the one that you use the most?
I would say probably the principle of reasoning. And the principle of reasoning is a bit different from what people typically interpret, because in the area of behavioral science, you see, we use words that have meaning above and beyond just the strict scientific sense. And so you use the term reasoning in day-to-day conversation, and you probably think of it as explaining to somebody the reason they should do, or all the reasons they should do something. But what the science behind this shows is that people don't do something because of all the reasons you give them. In fact, giving them a lot of reasons tends to incite a resistance response. People will do something for one reason that matters to them. They do something essentially because they want to do something. And so I use this, I would say, obviously I use all the principles as often as I can, but I will frequently think about if I'm asking something of someone, or if I'm hoping for a reply, for example, to an email, how could I light up the reward center of their brains such that this individual would want to do the thing that I'm asking? And that's really important, because if you can nudge them from doing you a favor into doing something because they want to do it, not only will they be happier about that, but they're also, you're not owing anything. They're not doing you a favor, essentially.
For me, I love the principle of effort. I think I always say, and I always joke, that 90% of our jobs is asking for favors. So we're literally contacting the network all the time, asking for favors, and the easiest way to get that favor is through the principle of effort, like making it as easy for that person as possible. And it does work quite often. So
I'm delighted to hear that. I'm delighted to. Well, I understand that it is very likely to work, but I'm delighted to hear that you are able to apply that in a way that's meaningful in your day-to-day jobs. Because literally, the easier you can make something to do, the more likely people will do it. And if it's easy enough, they won't even need a reason behind that request. So I'm pleased to hear that.
Awesome. So let's dive in. So when people hear about market value, most think a monetary kind of association with that. So they're thinking about the salary. What actually makes up someone's market value beyond the numbers?
And it is important to think beyond the numbers. But let's start first with this idea of what is market value and how that might differ for a person, let's say, compared to a piece of art, right? So we would typically use the term market value to represent what many, or on average, buyers would be willing to spend, what that is within a range where sellers would be willing to sell. And that is important background information. But if we put you now in the position of somebody trying to sell a piece of art, like a painting, realistically, what you're really interested in is what someone would be willing to pay for that painting. And of course, that can vary depending on psychological factors on both sides. For example, if you're in a desperate situation and you really need the money and you want to sell that painting, you might be willing to accept it for less than theoretically what you could get. Alternatively, on the other side, if the person buying your painting really, really wants that one specific piece, they might be willing to increase their price. Now, all of these features that I've spoken about apply to people as well as paintings. But on top, with a person, there's a more complex psychological environment. And that's really what I want to get into today, because the psychological factors are things that people don't think about very often. And they're also those that are kind of more modifiable, something you can do something about, right? So with a person, you've got to take into account their own complex emotional response to their beliefs about what they are worth. And with a hiring manager, he or she also has beliefs about their own worth and what the people around them should be worth in relation to, for example, their salary and package. But my key point here, I guess the thing I really want to get across is that we should define that relationship between the work you do and the total value that you get from it as a negotiation, where a negotiation is defined as a situation in which neither party has absolute power. Because that is always the case. You can always decide not to take the job or to walk away, and the hiring manager can always decide not to actually hire anybody. And if you think about this as always a negotiation between you and the other party, you'll actually prepare for it a lot better than you will otherwise.
I love that. Let's talk a bit about the forces behind a negotiation, because I'd really like to give people an understanding of the balance of power. And I think it can differ a little bit based on how competitive the market is, the economic outlook, but also the experience level of the candidate. If a person's market value is essentially a negotiation, what factors are impacting and affecting that scenario?
So the overall market situation in which you're seeking work is, of course, a factor. And you gave a really excellent overview of the situation in the UAE at the beginning of this podcast. Very accurate and very important. So knowing whether the market that you're in is buoyant or cautious is important, because that background affects how frequently opportunities will come up and also people's budget sizes. At the same time, that doesn't determine everything, because you can, of course, completely bomb out in a buoyant market. And you can also, as an individual, do very well in a market that's cautious. So what I would like to suggest people focus in on is the psychological factors that affect the negotiation from the hiring manager's point of view. And we can fairly reliably refer to 5 of those. These are things to think about in preparing your negotiation. The first is their belief about how easy it's going to be to find a good candidate, right? How long have they been looking? How many applicants are they getting? Now, it's pretty much a done deal here in Dubai. You advertise a position, you're going to get a bazillion applicants, right?
Straight away.
And so you need some kind of filtering process to get through to the people that you're interested in. But their perception of how easy that will be, how replaceable is this candidate? Second key factor is the level of pain or discomfort or issue that they're experiencing by not having somebody in this position, like the urgency to fill it. And you've talked before on this podcast about one of the positive factors here is that you often actually get interviewed live and you actually talk to people. And if you're talking to somebody who is currently in the middle of experiencing that pain because they don't have somebody, they are more likely to be looking and to be enthusiastic about finding a candidate soon. So the fact you're in front of them is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think a third thing is to take into account the authority, if you can get any sense of this is what's going to affect their perception. The power or authority they have to find any kind of flex. And it definitely pays to assume they have some level of flex. A study that came out a few years ago showed that around 90% of hiring managers have at least a little bit of flex and have not rejected a candidate because he or she tried to negotiate, and yet fewer than half new hires, for example, would consider, or new graduates would consider negotiating.
So this is salary, right? Flex on the budget, or
we've got some more factors that I will come to. Sorry, it's a scientific explanation, I have to give you my points.
Yes.
My fourth point, if I were in class right now, I'd be saying, now write these down.
We're here for it. We're taking notes.
You could take the professor out of the classroom, but so the fourth point is their, of course, perception of what they're going to need to pay to fill this position, and that is typically a range, and that can be modified at the time even. And then the fifth one is their perception of your worth. And these are all factors that will vary from person to person and are modifiable. These last two factors, their expectations of what they're willing to pay for filling that position and their perception of your worth are also can be quite dramatically affected by you sharing your current salary. And this is, if I were to give one key piece of advice, and if people were only listening to me up to this point, the one thing I would say is that's information that you're often asked for. Don't just reply mindlessly and reflexively, because that can have a big impact on these factors, suddenly modifying a range or a value of perception of worth. And that you don't want to just do without being very careful why you're sharing it.
Absolutely. And I used to be a recruiter for many years, a few years ago now. And I always used to ask the question, what are your minimum expectations? What is your and people would be like, oh, why are you asking me that? But I need to know, what is the minimum you will expect for everything that I've just sold to you and you've just sold to me? And that's how we would then decide on what their worth was, based on how they kind of ranked themselves and the budget that we had, and we'd come somewhere in between. But this is how we used to lock them in. So I feel bad for that now.
Yeah, you should.
Your job in many ways is to represent your employer, the company.
Yes.
And it's actually extremely valuable that you tell people this, because it is a negotiation.
Yeah.
And if you don't prepare as if it's a negotiation, then you are just going to be a victim of a process.
Correct.
And especially now that we're on the other side and we're with the students and we're like, right, you need to go in commanding this, because they're going to try and lock you at your minimum expectations. So you have to kind of reframe their energy as well, because they are most often they're entering into it with like a scarcity mindset. I need this and hopefully you need me, rather than this is what I can do for you. So no, this is really great. So we've broken that down.
And I think a lot of the time young graduates are willing to compromise on salary. Now, I'm not going to look straight at Gen Z. We talked about them in a different episode, and we talked a bit about how attuned to money they are versus purpose versus work flexibility. And our Gen Z guest said, no, we are capitalist as well. We want money. We need it because, well, we exist in this world. But I think that that's really where a lot, especially in this market, where a lot of junior people are getting locked in at lower entry points. And then if you get locked in low in your salary in your first role after you finish your degree, it's just going to take you longer. It's going to be a bit harder for you to then increase your salary internally. So
if you keep sharing that information.
So
you are ensuring, if you keep sharing that that information reflexively of what you're currently earning, you are ensuring that probably the maximum you're going to get is another 10% on top of that, right?
Exactly.
And so again, I'd say just be very careful about what you're sharing. And of course, if you're a new graduate, this is a problem because your current salary is zero.
Yes.
And you always look more valuable if you're already in a job. So be very careful about what you say in response. You don't have to directly answer the question. So if you'd ask me what's my minimum expectation, is actually in some ways a question I prefer to answer versus what's my current salary.
Yeah, exactly.
Because now I have a chance to set it. But that just helps reinforce to the listeners how you need to be prepared for those sorts of questions.
Absolutely.
Yes. And we would always flip, I also worked in recruitment, we would always flip that conversation on what is your range. And so that negotiation kind of can reach a stalemate as well. People would ask you, what's your minimum requirement? And you say, what is your range? And then it can go back and forth a little bit until someone throws a number. But then you should always go higher, right? 20% higher at least versus where you would set. So just some ballpark ideas. But Dr. Amanda, I wanted to also ask you, how would you prepare for a salary negotiation or for a job interview negotiation at any level in your career?
Great. And I'm delighted that you've asked that question, because many of the things I'm going to say will make kind of intuitive sense to people. But what I want to reinforce is that there is a specific formula which sets you up mentally for the best possible outcome. And there are 3 key steps to that. So the first one is, and this is your mental preparation you do beforehand, okay? I'm not saying everything we're about to talk about, you go into the interview and blurt out. Absolutely not. This is just how you mentally prepare. The first thing you should map out is, what is your best case scenario? Now, the technical term for this is a target point, but what it really means is your best case scenario. What's important here is that this should not be fantasy, okay? This has to be realistic. So your realistic best case scenario. Now, you've already alluded to some of the statistics available for the UAE. Doing research on the kinds of salary ranges that are involved. There are good reports that come out from companies like Hayes, from Michael Page, that can give you good data about a realistic salary range. It's important that you look for good quality data, not someone's anecdote about how they're making millions or whatever, and stuff on the internet. People are full of this like big stories, but get some good quality data. I would say also, as a business person, look at the company itself. Things like how big the company is, how much revenue do they make, how many employees do they have, do you have any information about what they're paying people in other positions, anything you can do to get a sense of what's a realistic and accurate salary range. The next thing, of course, for your ideal scenario, your best case scenario, is the non-salary factors. And whether you are Gen Z or not, as we've highlighted, they're important to everyone. But you also need to take into account all the other factors that go with salary, because we have strong evidence they have a massive impact on your life. For example, one of the factors that people rarely take into account but make a big mistake over is that the literature shows people will often, for example, accept a higher salary even though it has a long commute. But a commute is something that you experience every day, and it actively makes your life miserable. So something like, how far will you have to commute? What are the working conditions, lifestyle, location? Are they flexible at all? What about days off? These kinds of things, they all make up the package of actually what your life will be like. And what I would suggest you do is to highlight the things that are important to you, but then also try to put like a ranking or even ideally a monetary value against how much you'd be willing to pay for these things. And I'll give you a small example. When I first landed in Dubai, and it was bright and sunny every day, and I just come from Europe, and I know many people out there, they love the rain, but I'm not one of them and I don't miss it. And I remember thinking about how much would I pay every single day just for it to be sunny, right?
Yes.
That's something that's worthwhile for me. Having autonomy in my job, having a sufficient authority to be able to do a good job, these are important things to me. And so I would say, put all of this into your best case scenario. So that's the first. Second is, what is your walkaway point? And that is your question, the minimum, but not just the minimum on salary. Like, what is the point where you say,
the red flag, right?
This is a bad deal for me. And what's so important about those two factors is that together, mentally, they create this range within which you want to fall. And being aware of that and clearly aware of that really gives you a good mental framework. The final one, the third factor, is what is your alternative? If this deal doesn't work out, and like in technical terms, we call that the BATNA, doesn't matter, it's a stupid acronym. What it means is, if this doesn't work out, what is the best outcome for you? What is your option? And what we know from research is that simply having some idea of what is the best outcome for you if this doesn't work, it gives you a bit more confidence to focus on that range and to avoid agreeing to terms at the bottom end of your range, essentially. As I say, an important point is that I'm not recommending you share this information, simply that the more clear your picture of exactly what you're after, the more likely you are to achieve what you're after and not be at the mercy of a process. And I think the final factor, and this is important, and I always highlight this when I'm working with our students, our graduates on negotiation, is that the more that other person wants it to be you, the more the power balance kind of shifts back in your favor. So all the way through my interactions, my conversation, from the first contact, from the way I'm dealing with them, I'm thinking about how can I help influence this person into them wanting it to be me? And then subtly, that brings them forward towards the things that you're interested in.
Do you have any suggestions for, because I've just done a recent hire in my team, and it's just something that's just come to me. Is there any cues or tells that you can observe to identify this, to tap into that person's like intrinsic motivation of their needs for their team? Are there any like specific questions that you could suggest, or any cues from like body language, just from like a kind of like psychology perspective?
You mean from the job seekers?
Yeah. So when you're in that interaction and you're in the room with someone and you're looking to negotiate, and you know if they need you or if they like you, what cues should you be looking out for?
Oh, that's a very interesting question.
Because I think for me, I think I give away a lot. I can't hide anything on my face. So it'd be really easy to tell. But some people who have more of a poker face, what would you be looking out for?
Okay, so my suggestion is, I think it's quite difficult to do that, because particularly in an emotionally heightened situation like a job interview, it can be easy to misread things. And I can tell you that when I was a recruitment interviewer for Procter Gamble, if the interview was going well and the candidate was strong, because I'll always start the interview by trying to put someone at ease. That's really important because I want their best answers. I don't want them to be nervous and on defensive. So I ask them easy questions to begin with. But if it's going well, I'll typically get harder and harder and harder because I want to push them a bit, right? If it's really not going well, I'm going to be crazy friendly.
Yes.
I'm going to start talking about
level.
Where you do your Pilates or whatever, just because at the end of the day, why I don't need to be like mean to somebody.
Yeah.
But I can remember one of my best hires actually out here at the Procter & Gamble Jebel Ali office, somebody who I hired who was probably one of the best people I've ever been able to select. I asked her about her interview experience, and she said, I thought there was no way I was going to get the job. And I said, what, really? Even after you met me? And she said, especially after I met you. So it's quite hard to, if you're looking for like telltale signs, but my best advice would be, if you, not just in the interview itself, even in all the interactions, if you get a sense, if you ask these questions, like how much does this person need somebody? How much do they want it to be me? If you can look for a sense of that, you'll often be able to read something in that direction somewhere through the process. But I wouldn't say go into the interview and look for specific things like are their legs crossed or that. Because chances are you'll just wind yourself up in a circle and make where you're already nervous. So,
yeah. And I'll add a small thing there. I think the more the interviewer shares about the real problem they're trying to solve, especially if it's the hiring manager, but also the HR, the recruitment or the talent team, the more invested they, like you said, the more invested they are in that interview. And you can kind of measure that by how much information they give you about where they are as a business now, where they want to be, and what part you're playing in there. If it's a conversation and it turns almost into a planning meeting, a strategy meeting, because they see you coming on board, that's a very good sign. That's a healthy sign. So this is why I would tell our listeners, when they get the chance to ask questions, their questions shouldn't be the typical ChatGPT, what about pay? What about? It has to be about the problem the company is looking to solve by hiring you. And dive deep into that, understand the pain, because then you can sell yourself as the solution to that pain, and that's how you gain a lot more power in that negotiation. And another good sign is if they bring in other people. Oh, I want you to meet Mandy.
Yes.
I want you to meet Dr. Amanda. Or next time when you meet them, it's almost like planning the next thing. So that's kind of, you're closer and closer to closing the deal in a sense.
And that's terrific to hear you say that. And again, just reinforces what I've always witnessed, that is the things that you're doing in your career development function are hand in hand with what I'm doing in the classroom. Because with the MBAs, executive MBAs, MIMs, I would always be saying, for example, when they ask you, do you have any questions? One of the key questions would be, in this first year, how would you measure my success? What outcomes would you expect to see if I'm doing a really good job? It sends the psychological signal that you're focused on doing a good job, but it's also, at a psychological level, prompting them into thinking about having those results delivered and pairing that thought with having you present. So you then, it's like, Pavlov's dog, the bell rings, there's going to be food. Pairing, having that feeling about, yes, I would like to see these results delivered with your presence and your discussion and your conversation. So that fits very nicely.
Yeah. If I can share a very little quick trick, which I didn't really think of in the moment. It just kind of happened naturally. I was interviewing for a very large company. I really wanted a job. And I had to do a presentation to the managing director about how I would change whatever I was going to be hired for. And in that presentation, I used the branding of the company, and I kept referring to what I was doing as a we. We would do this, we would achieve this in 6 months' time. And it made me step into character as being part of the team. And I think it really allowed him to figure out, to just visualize what it would be like to have me in his team. Needless to say, I didn't need to do the next interview. He just contacted me after and he said, we would like to have you on board. I was like, okay, thank you. I would like to join you. I'll see you Monday.
And that is example. At the beginning of this, we were talking about the principle of reasoning, that people do something because they want to do it.
Yeah.
So you can give them all these reasons why they should hire you, but when they see that picture of you as part of their team and it solves that problem, it takes away that pain, that is what you're aiming for, that feeling. And I think it's very clever to talk about, we would do this together. This is how I see us solving these problems.
Yeah.
What are some of the most common ways that high potential people unintentionally undervalue themselves in conversations?
I think there are two key ways, and the first is not being prepared to communicate value. And particularly if you're currently an employee in a job, you get a salary, it tends, I'm sorry to say this, but it does tend to make you a bit lazy because your needs are being met, right? At least your basic needs. So not being prepared to communicate your value. And the second is underestimating the importance of communicating value. What words you say, what things you don't say, even the specific terminology you use. And I thought I'll give you a little anecdote just to describe that. So back when I had my own company, when I was a management consultant, I was doing some work inside Cisco for a gentleman, and he had known me, this gentleman, I think I can easily use his name without giving much away, Angus. I'd known him for quite a long time. We knew each other actually outside of work. And I figured that he knew all these things about me, the behavioral science, the PhD, the blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera. And what I found was that when he was introducing me in the company to his colleagues, he would literally just say, this is Amanda. And I'd wait for something more, thinking he must know all of these things, right? He must be able to give some explanation why I'm there. Nothing, okay? And then one day, this is when I was running my own company, I actually started teaching one small course at Holt. And I remember mentioning it to him. And suddenly there was something easy to cling on to. And from that moment on, when he was introducing me to colleagues, he would say, this is Amanda. She's a professor at Holt, right? And so this goes to show how even people who are very aware of these psychological factors can easily slip into assuming that people know what your value is without you making it easy for them to communicate, but for you to communicate to them and for them to communicate to other people. So here's an exercise that I would suggest every person listening does, whether they're not yet a graduate or whether they're currently in a role. And the first one is answer the question, why should somebody pay you to come into work?
Ooh, deep.
And if you find that your answer is a self-description, like because I'm really enthusiastic and I'm hardworking, etc., I'm not going to say that's terrible. Like the kind of character you have affects if people want to work with you or not. But you're really missing out on an opportunity to communicate value. You might be a really nice person, but at the end of the day, why should someone pay you to come to work? And think of this, it might help if you think of this as more like if this were a gig economy, like a platform, say Fiverr, you don't know if the person is nice to work with, you don't know what they look like, you don't know what country they're in, but you pay them to do a specific job. What are the problems you can solve, the results you can deliver? And now take those contributions and add power terms to them. And this again comes from a psychological factor, which is that people in general are very poor at judging something in absolute terms. Is it important? Is it big? Is it special? Is it expensive? You need to add comparisons. So you wouldn't just say, for example, I had the responsibility to do X. You have to be able to communicate some metrics, some value around that, like reducing time to market by 20% in a market where this process was typically extremely long, or adding an additional 1,000 listeners with every podcast episode, right? Some metrics around what are the key things you're actually delivering. And in my corporate roles, I did an exercise with my employees where I would ask them at the end of each month, send me an email highlighting what you delivered this month. Like if I had to fight for your salary, what data could you give me to fight for it? And what you'll find is that at first people are really resistant to it because it's hard. You have to think. They don't want to answer the question. They want to talk about the activities they've been doing, right? But if you push and push to develop the capability to do this, it sets up both those employees and me to be able to communicate their value. They're giving me the 3 bullet points they delivered this month. I can always use that in a conversation with my peers, but it sets them up just like developing a skill is like developing a muscle. The more often you try to do it, the better you get at it.
Yes.
So at a moment's notice, that person can say, this is what I add to the company. Whereas the person next to them is going to be saying, well,
I did this.
I'm responsible for this. I've spent a lot of time focused on, to be able to bring it down to a real result, a delivery, a problem you've solved.
I love that. And this is actionable. And there's a lot of frameworks out there as well, right? Like it's not too different from saying using like the star theory and things like that. It's just like that system of thinking, once it's in your mind, kind of conditions you to just communicate that way. So practicing this, I think, would be advantageous for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at all levels, but where I see a bit of potential for friction might be with the more junior students and graduates who don't have that much experience in the market. They don't have a lot of bullet points to refer back to. So what would you say could be their advantage? Is lack of experience, being a fresh Gen Zer into this market, is that ever an advantage, or could someone turn it into an advantage?
So here's the thing, is that it actually is, but most employers aren't going to see it. What we know from, again, the science research is that there's a difference between experience and expertise. But and in fact, there are many situations in which having less experience actually helps you to make a better outcome. And I'll give you just one example from the literature. There was a study done over several decades, a bunch of researchers found that if, for example, you are suffering from a medical condition that's really rare, you're more likely to have that diagnosed by a fresh medical graduate who has very little experience, I think it was 0 to 1 year, than someone who has 20 years of experience. Because the person with 20 years of experience, they're their decision-making framework is more attuned to what they've frequently seen, whereas the fresh graduate is more open to a whole variety of different ideas. So there are many circumstances where, I won't say many, but some, where not having any experience is actually beneficial, but a hiring manager is not likely to see that. So the key thing, if you are a new graduate, if you have limited experience, is your goal is to focus the conversation away from experience, right? And you have to look for proxies in your life for things you've done that are similar to what is needed in the company. And this is me now speaking as someone who pretty much every single job I've gone into, I've had no experience of doing that job. But what I have spent my time then doing is figuring out what are the problems that they're facing, why are they hiring for this position, and how can I give them evidence that I have a track record of delivering those things, but just in different circumstances, different context, right? You have to be able to, and so you'll need to prepare further if you don't have experience, but to think about where do you have expertise, where do you have evidence of an ability to solve a problem. And I know that, a lot of companies, certainly in Procter Gamble, we looked a lot at extracurriculums because they do have an impact. If you have gone out, been involved in clubs, brought potential clients into the school, created a communication platform, done something in your spare time, even played on a sports team, these things are proxies for results that you have to deliver at work. And so look for opportunities to communicate results from other areas of your life.
Look for those transferable skills. And I think also with the younger generations, the conversation is about skills and mindset. And a lot of the time when I speak to employers, they say that they want someone younger and fresher because they have that drive to explore all these other pathways of solving a problem that maybe the more seasoned professionals don't really have anymore. Maybe they've lost a bit of that enthusiasm to start all over again. And that is a unique advantage that someone young and fresh in the market has. I was actually talking to an employer the other day, and he's a marketing manager, and I asked him, would you want a young master's graduate for this role, or would you want an MBA who has 5 to 10 years of work experience? And he said, I don't want experience. I have experience. What I lack is a fresh view on what we're trying to do here. And it was refreshing and sobering to hear that. I said, okay, that sounds fantastic. That's something that very few people really think about, because you need complementarity in every team. You need people who have the things you don't have. They don't need to be exactly your spit image. They need to bring something unique to the table. So I think to our younger audience, I would say, think of your unfair advantage in the market. What's something that you know that you can do quite easily? Think of social media. Think of, the side hustles, all of this. I think the ability to work across multiple things at the same time that some of us don't have because we were trained to focus on one thing at a time. So I think there's a lot there that can be seen and portrayed as an advantage for a young person, which would make them more valuable.
It's a very important perspective. And what you've just shared there from the employer that you were speaking to, I mean, that's also quite an enlightened perspective. But I think this people may find very helpful, particularly fresh graduates or people with limited experience. When that job advertisement says, I'm looking for someone with 5 years experience, bear in mind that essentially, and this is just because human brains are lazy, right? It's a proven fact. We'd like to do things as easily as possible. Typically that 5 years experience, what they're saying in shorthand is, I'm looking for someone who knows how to do the job without me having to spend that much time, right? Training them, okay? So if instead you can turn the conversation in that direction, rather than focus on the experience, focus on something else. Try to find how you can nonetheless take away problems even without the experience. Essentially, what is it that they need in this role? And then convince the person that you can do those things and leave the element of the 5 years experience to the side.
I love that, Amanda. Thank you so much for sharing that insight, because it's so usable when someone's in the interview process. And to go back to where we started about market value And to summarize, if someone wanted to increase their market value over the next 12 months, what are the smartest moves they can make? Because we've given them frameworks, we can give them a strategy now.
So if we were to look at the verifiable factors, practical things that people could do over the next 12 months, one certainly is education. I know there's a lot of debate. Are degrees really worth it? Will they be around in the future? But whatever people are arguing or discussing, the truth of the matter is having that certificate or having those initials next to your name automatically increases your perceived status versus people who don't have that. Another key thing, look for any experience that you can with a big brand name. When we talk about, let's say, Mars or Coca-Cola or Porsche versus smaller, less known brands, they automatically carry more status with them. So if you can do anything to associate yourself or get experience working with a big brand in your current job or in your university degree, that's a great start. Other things that we know are highly likely to increase your perceived value, any experience managing or developing other people. Now, if you're not in a role where people report to you, you're going to have to more actively look for that. But if you can still give, I work with one of our master's students, a graduate from 10 years ago, and something that he did that was really valuable when he was on campus is he provided his services to develop other people in the field of their ability to use various apps and to be able to demonstrate to potential employers that he had helped develop a group of 50, in some cases, executive MBAs in their skills. Sure, he didn't have anyone formally reporting to him, but managing, developing, improving other employees, other people, this is really valuable. And another verifiable factor would be expertise in something. Expertise, and again, making that distinction between expertise and experience. If you can demonstrate expertise in something, that automatically increases your status relative to other people. But through all of this, the key thing is, spend the next 12 months practicing communicating those values, because they aren't just automatically going to be perceived by another person.
Yeah. And I think when we think about the market as well, because I think you're trying to communicate your market value, and then you also do need to take stock as to what's actually happening in that market from an economic point of view as well. And I think there is a shift from kind of capacity building to capability building. And I think this kind of sits in line with that, because you have to know what it is that people are needing and wanting, and what direction that's shifting towards. So everybody, from what we've read, that there is a shift towards people wanting experts in their teams rather than generalists. And we talked about this in previous episodes. And we always try to dig deep, especially if we're kind of discussing a specific industry. But the trend is that everybody is going towards what are your expertise in something and how can you communicate that? So really honing in on what it is you actually do, rather than saying I can do a little bit of everything and spreading yourself thin across loads of different skills. So thank you for giving us those actionable insights, because what I've loved about this episode today is that there are a lot of tangible things that people can actively do and frameworks that they can take to kind of shape how they are going into the market, and that's fantastic. So we appreciate your time, Dr. Amanda, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, thank you for coming and having this conversation with us.
You're both so welcome. I think you're doing a really great job. I love listening to the podcast. I love seeing the people who are on it, because often we're from similar networks.
Yes.
And honestly, it's really fun. You're doing a terrific job. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
And if you would like to find more content around career trends and hiring in the UAE, then please do subscribe and follow our channels on YouTube and Instagram. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for tuning into the For Those Made to Do podcast. We are your hosts, Sahota
and Bianca Pavel. This podcast is all about the doers who have achieved career success in the UAE and the stories that go with it.